on one view, legal aid is a large legal practice, Legal Aid Commission. We have 600 lawyers. We operate in 24 locations throughout the state of New South Wales, and we go to about 230 outreach locations. And those figures were valid in 2014-15, because that's where I got most of my information from this morning. Another month we'll have a 2015-16 report, so I'm relying on that. Apart from having 600 lawyers, we have 20 Aboriginal lawyers, something that we're very proud of at Legal Aid, and that number continues to grow. The services that we provided in 2014-15, just very quickly, about 175,000 duty services in the face of a court or tribunal, over 35,000 grants of legal aid where people actually are represented before those courts and tribunals. We had 565,000 information services we provided, over 150,000 advice and minor assistance services were provided, and we answered 15,500 calls on our youth hotline, which is quite large and quite staggering figure, I think. So that's the sort of services that we provide. In relation to, you mentioned community legal education, we delivered about 3,000 community legal education sessions in 2014-15. We had over 700,000 fact sheet posters, CDs, DVDs, booklets, pamphlets distributed. We have over 130 publications on our website, quite a few of them in many community languages. So community education is a vital part of what we do. So apart from being a sort of traditional legal practice delivering traditional legal services, we do start with our information services through to our community legal education services, the work that we do in courts in relation to our duty work, through grants of aid. We of course do ADR, or we call it FDR, particularly in the family law area. So we provide a whole range of services, much more so than probably your average legal practice would be providing to, can I say, the usual community citizens that attend to those. I just wanted to say something very quickly, that we deliver those services very much in partnership with the legal assistance sector, particularly COCs and the Aboriginal Legal Service. We also could not deliver those services without the private profession in this state. And we and our clients owe a great debt of gratitude to the work that the privates do on behalf of our clientele, and as you know, at rates that are not anywhere near the commercial rates that they do the normal professional work at. If I could just illustrate that, in that same financial year, in terms of grants of aid and duty services together, 42% were delivered by private lawyers and 58% by in-house. But when you break that down, grants of aid, which are the big ticket items, 68% was done by private lawyers and 32% by in-house. So you could see the reliance that we have on the cooperation, the professionalism and the goodwill of the private profession throughout the state. I wanted to just talk a little bit about funding. And I was pleased that Warren Mundy in the earlier session dealt with that argument that the Commission recommended $200 million for the legal assistance sector. It did not, as Warren made very clear. That was the starting point before you went through a detailed study of what that actual figure should be, and I think it would be much higher than $200 million. Can I say that in relation to legal aid, in that same financial year, our state funding was about 46% of our total funding. Our Commonwealth funding was around 26%. Our public purpose fund funding was about 13%, and we have other various pieces of funding on top of that, but they're our principal areas of funding. In relation to how we spend that money, 46% on crime, family is 28%, civil is 14%, and 13% on community partnerships. In relation to Commonwealth funding, the new National Partnership Agreement commenced last year. Legal aid's funding cut from that partnership was $2.6 million in the first year, rising to over $16.5 million over the 5-year life of the agreement. So it was not a great time for legal aid in terms of its Commonwealth funding. In terms of our state funding has increased from combined with public purpose funding, about 45% of our funding. The Commonwealth, at the time of the Hard government, was contributing 55%. So as I said, the state was providing on its own 46%. So our state funding, just over the last 5 years, has increased by 36%. Our Commonwealth funding has increased by 6%, which is not even CPI, of course. We've gone backwards in real terms. Can I just talk about service delivery challenges, if I may? I'll rattle through this. Stop me if you want to concentrate on something else. Anyway. Look, Warren Mundy was correct, of course, in the question that Ed asked of him in relation to severely disadvantaged clients. And as you know, of course, the law and justice work demonstrated that 9% of people had 65% of the legal problems. And to go to Ed's question of Warren, the clients of legal aid are the clients of facts, are the clients of the justice system, certainly the clients of police, but also the clients of all the many social housing clients and all the other social parts of government. We share these clients and we do not deal with them well in a legal sense, but most certainly in a social support sense. The clients that we're talking about have got mental illness, disabilities, insecure housing. They're frequently victims of violence. They're in out-of-home care. They're under 21 years of age, and they're on Centrelink benefits of some description. So we're talking about people with severe and ongoing disadvantage. What we've been focusing on at Legal Aid, and can I say in the broader legal assistance sector as much as we can, is providing a range of services to those people, appropriate referrals to other agencies that can deal with their problems. We do legal health checks. We've trained many hundreds of community workers to do those mental health checks in all sorts of locations. We have, at the moment, I think about 14 health justice partnerships where lawyers can actually attend a consultation between a doctor and a patient and be called in to deal with a particular problem. Just one example of what happens in health justice partnerships. The reason I'm saying this is we are getting better at looking holistically at those clients, those severely disadvantaged clients. We have attached a group of civil lawyers to the criminal children's criminal law service, so that we have civil lawyers now for severely disadvantaged young people with a whole spectrum of issues and problems, getting that civil law advice that I think Ed was alluding to in terms of their accommodation issues, abuse issues, substance abuse issues, all those sorts of issues that I spoke about before are very, very prominent in the kids that go before the Children's Court. That's an outcome of the problems they face in their lives. And we're getting better at that. I think that is one of the challenges for the future for Legal Aid and our other partners in the legal assistance sector, is to provide those more holistic services, referral services, so that we're picking these people's issues up and dealing with them as people issues rather than as an isolated legal issue, which it frequently is not.
Good. Jane, did you have any questions?
So what do you think happens to those people that just can't get any legal assistance? Yeah.
Well, most people can get some form of legal assistance. Warren was right. Just because you're on some sort of welfare, you might qualify for our means test, but you may not necessarily have a matter type that we will actually deal with. But we can usually give you some advice and minor assistance. Sometimes we will refer to some of our colleagues and partners in the COC movement who have special expertise in certain things. So some of those people can get some services, but they can't frequently get the service that they actually need because of lack of resources. And that is one of the major challenges that the whole sector is facing. You know about the funding cliff next year for both COCs and ALS. New South Wales Legal Aid is taking its Commonwealth pain over 5 years with our reduced funding. They're going to take it in one hit next year when 25% of COC funding will disappear. And ALS, I think the last figure I heard was something in excess of $1 million. Now that is almost criminal. People that will not be able to be assisted. Some of the COC clients, ALS clients, will come to legal aid, and we'll, of course, be welcoming them as potential clients of ours. But there's limited resources throughout the sector, and we can't do everything we want to do or provide the services we want. So some people fall between the cracks.
Bill, the well-publicised Legal Aid Matters campaign has highlighted that only about 92% of Australians qualify for legal aid, and that it works out to be about even 40% of people below the poverty line don't qualify. So how urgent is that need for pumping in more funds to the legal assistance?
Look, it has been urgent for a decade now, for probably back to, I'll justify my grey hair, I'll go back 20 years to when the Howard government actually changed its contribution to legal aid. And it hasn't really, successive Commonwealth governments, it's not just governments of a particular persuasion, have not restored that funding, let alone increased it as it should have been doing. So when you look at the challenges that we're facing over the next 5 to 10 years, the economic outlook is generally bleak in terms of the money that government will need to put to a whole range of areas in terms of education, housing, transport, hospitals, etc. In terms of the population growth, we are planning well, it seems, for cities to be able to accept more people over the next 15 or 20 years, but we're not planning to increase at all the social and legal services that those people might need. So there's no increase in funding for those. So all the population growth that they are forecasting, coupled with the ageing population that we're going to be seeing over that same period, we're not planning for social services, and I include legal services in that at all. There is no linkage of funding. The saddest thing for me is we have something called a national partnership that falls way short of being anything to do with national or partnership. It is really depressing. National partnership implies to me you have a meeting of minds of various levels of government who sit down and work out what is needed in a particular area and apply themselves to providing what resources they can in constrained economic and difficult economic times, but in a logical and concise way. One illustration, the Commonwealth has acquired a number of areas of jurisdiction from the states and territories over the years: consumer law, industrial law, no transfer of resources for the legal assistance sector to deal with those. And we all know in the sector how difficult it is to help people who've got employment law problems or consumer problems. It is very difficult, and you can only scratch the surface of dealing with those types of problems. Another problem that we face is the changing nature of the profession for regional and remote Australia, particularly for New South Wales, our area of expertise. As my baby boomer generation move out of the field, it is going to be challenging to replace those people in their practices throughout New South Wales. It's going to be very challenging. And it's going to be challenging also to get them to come in with the sort of commitment to local community that many of our country and regional practitioners have at the moment, because they have to earn a living as well. So if we can't lift the fees that we pay to the profession to do that, I have concerns about us being able to service the community of New South Wales in this strong partnership that we have at the moment between legal aid, the other forms of legal assistance sector services, and the private profession.
Two quick questions. The first, I guess I want to take you back to the end of your prepared remarks at the start. Strikes me that there's a very positive story for legal aid to tell that is perhaps not well known. I think the sort of stereotypical image people have of seeing any lawyer, and particularly a legal aid lawyer, is that they've got this discrete problem and the lawyer solves or doesn't solve that problem. Whereas I wonder if you can comment a bit more on the more sophisticated approach that legal aid now takes in a range of areas, particularly working with disadvantaged people, to, I guess, identify where their legal problem fits with respect to perhaps some of those other broader social problems that they may have.
Yes, look, just a few quick comments. An illustration perhaps, our civil law section of New South Wales has been working with Aboriginal women in prison. And most of those Aboriginal women are in for very short periods of time and have very disadvantaged lives. Now, we've been doing some work with them, and the idea is to try and sort some of their life problems out before they get back in the community. So we're actually trying to say to government, we're actually trying to say to corrective services, we have a very good relationship with, that the more we can do work of the civil law, family law kind with prisoners before they get out, the more we can try and ensure they don't come back. If you've got to change people's circumstances if you're going to stop recidivism being as high as it is. So that's just one example. So we're trying more and more to deliver those holistic services, but it's against a backdrop of a tidal wave of people who need duty law services in the local courts throughout New South Wales or in the family law jurisdiction. So we're actually seeing a difficulty keeping up with those clients while we're trying to provide those more, I'll call it more holistic services, and try and deal more compassionately, more sensitively, and more completely with the range of problems and the underlying issues that people bring to us when they finally do realise they've got a legal problem that we can help with.
No doubt there's a problem always of the urgent sometimes trumping the important, because I mean that example you gave I think is probably a really good example of providing good outcomes for individuals, but also good outcomes for the rest of the community, because you're sorting out problems at their cause, which is going to be financially advantageous for all of us. I want to ask maybe my second and final question is a slightly trickier question. You're coming towards the end of your time at Legal Aid, and as you've, I think, very candidly acknowledged, it's a really difficult time in the legal assistance sector. I wonder if you can comment a bit about the relationship between Legal Aid as the biggest player in the legal assistance sector and some of the other, particularly, I guess I'm talking about the Aboriginal Legal Service and community legal centres, because having just left the CLC sector, it strikes me that I've never seen a more tense relationship than there is now. And that I find very worrying, and I think it is a function partly of funding. But I wonder if you have also seen that, and if so, whether it's something you see as that there's a solution to that problem beyond simply the government injecting more cash.
Look, I think the solution to the problem is continue to build strong partnerships. We have so many ways we demonstrate those strong partnerships, from the New South Wales Legal Assistance Forum, cooperative legal service delivery programs that operate in 12 rural regional communities. So we do an awful lot together. Part of the tension, I think, comes straight away from the funding decrease that is going to happen. Legal Aid is a partner to other players in the legal assistance sector in terms of service delivery, but we also manage the program. And I think there's some tension, and we are going through the discussions, for example, with CLC at the moment, to try and work out, in cooperation with them through CLC New South Wales, how we adjust the funding that will be available unless things change, which we all hope it does. How do we adjust to that level of funding and still try and cover the sort of services that CLCs want to deliver, particularly in regional areas and through outreach services which they provide as well. So there's a bit of tension there. I think the partnership is strong enough to survive that. In some jurisdictions, it's the Justice Department that handles all that funding, so that tension is removed. That's a potential solution to try and smooth that relationship. I actually think it's better if we work through the issues together and try and resolve those funding difficulties and focus then more on strengthening the partnerships. There are lots and lots of things between individual CLCs, Legal Aid, ALS that people never hear about. And those are really, really good signs of a strong and positive relationship. But again, a lot comes back to resources. A better resource sector could work much more closely together, be integrated much more, rather than be worried about whether or not you're going to have to lay a staff member off in the next 3 to 6 months. It's a dreadful thing to have hanging over your head when all you're trying to do is service your community.